what I would like to talk about tonight is probably one of the most exciting adventures I had over the last couple of years, and that's a trip to Brazil for some cave exploration. We started this project, really talking about this project in 2022 with a friend of mine and one of our instructors. And then I thought it will never really happen because it was so complicated, and you'll see on a couple images showing how complicated all of this was. And then when it happened, it was absolutely amazing. We were very surprised with what we found. And I don't know how to use this remote. The green button. So the whole story starts pretty interestingly, right? So cave divers tend to be creatures of a habit, right? I live in Florida, so obviously cave diving in Florida is very convenient. There are lots of caves to explore. When I'm getting bored with Florida caves, I can fly to Mexico and dive there. And then I know about a couple countries in Europe that kind of have some cave, so there is some diversity, right? And very rarely we think, even from exploration perspective, outside of the box, and that's kind of, Patrick is a great example of doing that, like, you know, going to places where you won't even expect to find water, forget water-filled caves. So Brazil kind of ends up somewhere in these kind of group of countries where you would never think, like, you know, even as a cave diver, like, I didn't know much about cave diving there. And then when I was invited for first project, which was more of a like underwater archaeological project, and we're driving through the country and realize that all of this country is formed out of different kind of carbonated or basaltic rock, completely permeated with caves. You're like, oh, how did I never even thought about coming here? And then I started pulling up some statistics, right? And statistics is that scientists in Brazil currently know about 6,000 caves, right? And then the model they have, the newest model they have based on what they know about their geology, there can be as much as 150,000 caves in this country. And so that's obviously very amazing, especially if you think from exploration perspective, and then you think, right, so there are 6,000 known caves, so probably there are maps and you can just go and dive them, and then you go to probably one of the most comprehensive international web pages that have quite a lot of information about cave diving in different regions of the world, and you find that out of 6,000, there are 25 caves that were really explored, and 17 were kind of mapped, and 6 that actually have maps published. And you're like, oh, that's actually exciting, and that provides tremendous potential for exploration. But on one hand, you have ever-growing local community of cave divers, and Patrick sitting here watching his phone was part of his of one of the most recent international projects with like local cave diving federation and one of the biggest local teams. There was a region of Bahia and the region kind of within this state, Chapada Diamantina, which is known for probably it's the fourth region there in quantity and size of caves. I also, obviously, post factum, found that GE has a very long story in Brazil. Jared was there. Our ex-instructor, Marcus Werneck, did some research there. Some of the local divers did some biological research. GE presence in Brazil and GE exploration in Brazil goes as far back as 1999. So that's all great. So then if you know that there are so many caves, and if you know that there are cave divers, and if you know that there are even international projects, how come less than 1% of these caves was actually explored and even seen by people? And then when you get there for the first time, you realize, right? So one, never did I think that this is such a huge country. Right? It's absolutely enormous. Second thing is that while the country is very large. Roads are not everywhere, and some of these roads are roads over only sometimes, and sometimes they are really lakes, and sometimes they're mud, and sometimes they're just not there. You also, in a country with extreme level of bureaucracy and very strict government, so everything, literally everything you do requires permits. That's very hard to get. And then in the end, there is safety, right? Some states are super unsafe, others are relatively unsafe, but you cannot say that there is a safe region to be in Brazil. Some areas are dangerous because of the terrain, some areas are very dangerous because of wildlife, others because, like, if you go close to Paraguay and Uruguay, you can be very easily kidnapped by narco traffickers, and that becomes pretty big problem, like if you're exploring caves in the jungle. So to get there, what you need the most, I think, is solid local contacts who have connections with the government or with scientific bodies, ideally with all of the above, who speak local, like number of local dialects of Portuguese, and who are really well connected. Luckily, one of our instructors, Sergio, is such a person. He's connected with governments. He's also connected with a number of scientific groups and universities all through Brazil. So he was able to secure a number of permits, and he is in, like, because he can always find a scientific reason to go somewhere and explore, true or false, then we can always get, or almost always can get permit to get where we want to go. For this particular project, we selected the state of Mato Grosso. State known to have a lot of flooded caves. It's some of the nicest touristic, just snorkeling locations, swimming location is known to be in this state. So Sergio said, if there are so many known sinkholes that are just pretty, there should be some going cave. So pure assumption. He looked at some aerials, he talked to some locals, he talked to local tourist authority and university, and they gave him a list of possible targets. And we selected two. One was on private land, one was on the state park land. And that was relatively easy because somebody else was taking care of all of this, right? Sergio organized the permit, came up with the target, and invited Jared and myself to come over in 2023 to do some attempts of exploration. What I didn't know, and I didn't know a lot of things, but one was, so we flew to São Paulo, right? Beautiful city, really nice. He met us, and then he said, now we need to load cars with everything I have in the house, because where we're going, there is nothing, like absolutely nothing. There are a bunch of cows, there are a bunch of different wildlife, beautiful landscape, no dive shops, no car shops, nothing, right? So everything we may need over the next 10 days, we need to bring with us. So he invested in this super fancy pickup truck and the small trailer. That small trailer is a compressor and a gas bank and everything you may need in a remote location. And then, which I also didn't know, we just got in a car and traveled for a little bit over 2,200 kilometers through a country with no roads and no, like in very theoretical safety. As we were driving, that was pretty interesting, right? We were driving through the beautiful, absolutely beautiful country. And as we're driving further and further away from like city after city, and all of a sudden it's jungle, and there are no more cities, and there are no more villages, and no more people. I'm like, where are we going to stay? Right? And then all of a sudden, absolutely, like when I was in state of despair, thinking of like tents and hammocks and snakes and spiders, all of a sudden we end up in a very small resort, like 6-room resort in the middle of nowhere, super beautiful, super convenient, beautiful place that allowed us to run compressor overnight, which is extremely weird. So we got there, we settled in, we discussed the plans. The first cave we were going to dive was called Dolina Paijoa. I, again, didn't know anything. Sergio purposefully didn't give any information, right? So we just planned the dives. We agreed that we'll go as a team of 4, Sergio and his friend Alex and me and Jared. We will be using 2 different types of rebreathers. We brought our own videographer, Richie Denmark, who did a bunch of work for GE webpage and all of the GE TV. We brought a couple local scientists to work with us and give us some tasks and some kind of get some, at least something useful out of us because they gave us all these permits. Very quickly, like in advance, we agreed that all of these will be only rebreathers because how far we were, how little we could bring. Sergio and Alex bravely decided to bring JJs because I had some experience in Brazil previous year. Jared and myself decided to bring modified RB80s. So RB80s are working as closed-circuit rebreathers with side mount tanks. And that's like, we made equipment decisions without knowing what we're going to do, how deep are we going, if we're going to find any cave, what's going to happen. So we got to the location, right? So we got to that nice resort, filled the tanks, got the gear ready, and then we kind of got ready for the day one. You know, after you have this very scary moment of not knowing where you're going to stay overnight and where you're going to sleep and what you're going to eat, and you find this nice location, right, that puts you in a state of relative calm. And then we drove for another 40 minutes. And then the car just stops and says, okay, we need to leave now and we need to walk. And I'm like, what? Because I'm Floridian, right? So I expect to drive to the dive site, get out of the pickup truck, get in the water and do the dive of any length, right? Walk. I didn't bring a bag. So I put my side mount harness, clipped everything I could to the D-rings, and bravely started walking, not knowing how long. I'll tell you, quite long. Like about 2 kilometers up the hill and down the hill through the jungle, following a guide, going through a field primarily populated by local cows that are really big, and there are a couple bulls, and they really don't like when you tread through their land. So I think that out of this trip, the most dangerous part was encountering that, you know, wildlife, or domesticated wildlife, that really was protective of their land. So little guide was saying, let's go. And I'm like, oh no. And now you can go a little bit more, and now you have to run. So we kind of, the goal of that run, walk, and finally get to the location was hopefully to explore, but really we didn't know where we're going, we didn't know, we heard that people were diving there, we didn't know what we're going to find. We got to that location, so again, about 2 kilometer walk through, like along pretty narrow trail, crossing the mountain ridge, and then all of a sudden, and that's absolutely amazing sight, you end up in that beautiful sinkhole. Right? It wasn't really crystal clear immediately. It was covered with some pollen and some calcite, but as we moved some of that away, crystal clear, super blue, absolutely amazing, basaltic rock around. The only problem is at 45 meters jump. And unlike Patrick, we didn't bring a ladder or ropes. So we actually had to jump. That's where I was really happy that we decided to bring side mount,